everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, for this very special, what season is it? It's springtime. It's the springtime, spring 2024 book club episode. And I'm here with my special book club co-hosts.
It's me, your fabulous first co-host, Jackie.
And it's me, Diana. Whenever we get to that moment, I panic and I try to remember first what year it is, second, who goes first based on that year. And then usually by that time, you've started talking.
Yeah. You're like, I remember.
It's everyone's favorite bit. We did a poll and everyone's like, it's our favorite bit of who's going to talk. Does anyone notice? Has anyone ever noticed?
According to the polls, none of our bits are the favorite bits.
That's probably true.
But wait, we have another guest with us.
Yes.
Yeah, it's me, Alan, book club guy.
Woohoo!
Hey, Alan!
You know it's a book club because Alan's here. Unless it's an episode he's on, in which case it would say with Alan Haberman.
Actually, they say featuring Alan Haberman.
No, sometimes they say with, when they say featuring other times, which is a logic that I made up at some point and I forgot why I did it. So who knows?
On the CEs, they all say featuring, but like FEAT period. Yeah.
And then also just so we remember, we really need to update my bio on the website because we did that before I had my BCBA. So it's really
okay.
You want send us a new bio, Alan? It's on my to-do list to do an update of guests. I think I try to do that every month or so, but then usually it takes a little longer. So please send that. I'll update that. So everyone, if you are reading this in the day after we record it, when we haven't edited it, then the file is wrong. But probably when this comes out, it will be updated. How'd you get this file? Like, how'd you get it in our Dropbox? What? Anywho, this is a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research. And most of the time we pick a topic and then review relevant research articles. However, when we do these book club episodes, we are talking about an entire freaking book. Except in this case, because every other book we've read in 2024 has been incredibly long, we decided, or Diana demanded, she threatened us. She stayed in her trailer.
Equivalent of us deciding.
She stayed in her trailer. She wouldn't come out until we picked a book, or we put in our polls books that were really short, but not just really short, but really short and actionable. So you could take the book, read it in a day, and then change your practice the very next day. So we got some short ones here, and the winner of our poll was Activity Schedules for Children with Autism, Teaching Independent Behavior by McClannahan and Krantz. If you're reading the first edition, then you, like me, picked the wrong link on Amazon. If you're reading the second edition, you're like Jackie and Alan, who just already had the second edition on their bookshelf.
We sure did.
Ooh. Sorry.
So we'll be doing both editions because we all read a version of the book.
I just want to say that their names combined either remind me of the Golden Girls or of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
Oh.
I was thinking Golden Girls.
Right?
And we should make a pause because Alan and Rob informed me that both of these authors have passed away.
Oh, I have a whole bio section.
Oh, great. Never mind.
So I'm glad you prepared and read all the notes that I painstakingly wrote.
I don't read your notes. Those are for you, man. They're not for me.
That's for me. Okay.
Okay, I have a joke, and it's sad that Diana has walked away because we could combine them into Goldenkrantz and Guildenstern and just get Golden Girls and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern all in one.
I feel like you could really get like an off-Broadway hit with Goldenkrantz and Guildenstern. Was that it?
Goldenkrantz and Guildenstern. Yeah, just have like the banter of the Golden Girls with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. Got it.
Denmark, 1602.
Picture it. You gotta say picture it.
Picture it.
No one knows except for you two, so we gotta move on.
Oh, Golden Girls is still weirdly popular.
No, I love Golden Girls.
Because it's a very old show. It was like I was a child when I watched that show. Okay, well, we're not talking about Golden Girls for much longer. I mean, I'm sure it'll come back up, but not the goal. We're going to be talking about activity schedules for children with autism. So we're going to be going through the book. And unlike some book clubs where I think we sort of, do some summary, do some, general conversation, this book is brief enough that I think we probably will go through the whole book in a summary form, which is pretty great. So if you are really in a rush and you're like, yeah, I don't have time to read the whole book. If I could do it in half the time and just listen to people tell me about the book, then man, is this the podcast for you. So if you are getting this in the spring of 2024, thank you so much for subscribing on our Patreon. You're able to get 2 CEs for listening to this episode for free. If you are getting this in the spring-ish of 2025, the content is probably still the same because this book was written back in the 90s, even second edition. When do you have for second edition?
I think 2010.
Yeah.
Oh,
2010.
yeah. Mine's 2010. Okay, so 1999 and 2010. So it's still very old. But that year probably won't have made a difference in terms of the content. So let's get a little into the book. I'll do a little bit of a author background, and then we'll talk about kind of our general thoughts. So Lynn McClannahan was born in 1940 in Iowa and went to Drake University and then Kansas, got her PhD at the University of Kansas. And Pat Krantz was born in 1941. They have very parallel careers, and then they worked together for 35 years, probably because a lot of similarities between them. So Patricia Krantz was born in... What?
Jackie and Diana situation.
It's very much Jackie and Diana situation.
We need to write a book, Diana.
Together forever.
This does feel like the kind of book the two of you might write together of like, we're just writing a no-nonsense book with the steps. There we go. So Pat Krantz was born in 1941, also in Iowa, and she earned her bachelor's degree and pretty much the same places as Lynn McClannahan, including her PhD at the University of Kansas. And then the two of them became the executive directors of the Princeton Child Development Institute in Princeton, New Jersey, which is a research and intervention program for children and adults with autism. And this is really where they did a lot of the work that you may have read that they published in the 90s on picture activity schedules, as well as they did work on fading and script fading for social interactions, which is the other book that they wrote, which kind of looks the same as these two books in terms of being kind of a smaller book. I think that's the one I read. I read one when I did an internship my junior year in undergrad, and I had a book that was like this with the same kind of crazy 90s Saved by the Bell looking cover. But I can't remember if it was picture activity schedules or it was the script fading book that they also wrote.
There's a whole series of these topics in autism books that all have similar, as Alan put it, 90s-tastic covers on them. So like I have another one for reaching out, joining in.
That's a good one. I have that one too.
Colleagues on social skills is really good, but it looks very similar. So
I remember the Language Master, so it's got. I feel like it's got to be Krantz McClannahan.
You may have had the AAC one, which is one that I had also that was the same series. So
you think I should have gone?
A bunch of them.
I should have gone and visited my mom and searched for this book, which I is somewhere in my old bedroom. So both of them worked together for 35 years. They both sadly passed away. Pat Krantz died in 2020 and Lynn McClannahan in 2022. So pretty recent passings. But I think this book really captures, if you've read most of their kind of early mid-90s work on activity schedules, this really takes what was in those publications and fleshes it out with more action steps for parents and more for clinicians. So there's a little background on the book. Why don't we get into some general thoughts? I mean, what were people's kind of thoughts reading this book? I mean, it's hard to be too critical of a book that you can read in an afternoon and then say, oh, that's a fun review, or oh, I forgot about that from the research, or oh, I'm going to try that the next time I do an activity schedule.
I want to go first.
Okay.
Then you can.
Thank you.
It is 2024.
Yeah. There's a lot of things I love about this book. There are some things that if I was going to recommend a rewrite, I would change in the book, just due to the age of the things. Not the things that you were mentioning, Rob, but just like procedures that they mention, I would probably take out and add something different. But the things I love about the book is that I do feel that this book is technological in the biggest sense, right? Like if I wanted to make myself a picture schedule as a parent and never had seen one before, man, does this show it, tell it, and then I feel like I can do it, right? I can go to the store, I can get some Velcro dots. I actually remember getting Velcro dots when I was a behavior therapist, getting that construction paper, using those file protectors, right? Putting it in that binder. I remember doing that. in remembering when I was a behavior therapist, how easy it was to make the schedule, right? I think sometimes people forget why we would use activity schedules. And I think this book does a really nice job of laying out all of the benefits of using an activity schedule in a cohesive manner, right? I mean, it's not something that you would necessarily you wouldn't have to use it at school, but I have seen it be so beneficial for parents, right? And so beneficial for providing structure in the home setting. And so that's something that they really talk about in the book. And I think in my experience, I have loved that for the students that I have worked with. I also really appreciate the end chapters where they talk about the common problems that people have with picture activity schedules. I like how they talk about transferring the activity schedule from picture schedule to a written schedule to to-do list to appointment book. I like they say PDA. Then they're showing their age right there when they're like, oh my gosh, everyone's got a PDA in their pocket, right? It's like a BlackBerry. And now, like,
it would have been like a Palm. It would have been like a
personal Palm Pilot. It's like the personal
data
device.
assistant. Personal data assistant.
I knew Alan would know.
Or Lisa.
Even though he was like 9 years old then. But that's okay.
He's like, he had
one. I had them.
I didn't have one.
I knew you would.
Or at least I had little like calculators and schedulers that looked like them because they also looked like maybe Star Trek tools and stuff like that.
Yeah,
so
right?
Like,
the recorder. Yep.
I think, if you're...
I think the recorder was made from a makeup compact.
Yes.
One of them was.
The tricorder?
Like you open
the communicator.
up. Yeah, the communicator.
The tricorder was like... I was looking at Super 8 camera.
It looked like a thermometer they like the nurses used to have.
Is this original Star Trek or Next Generation?
That's a TNG reference right there. Okay. Sorry, I derailed this.
Another thing I really appreciate that I think people sometimes lose sight of when they're using activity schedules is that they should embed social interaction within the schedules. I loved that they really highlighted different ways and across different, different levels of working through things, like how you could embed social interaction in the schedules. And I love that because I think one of the most common rebukes of using activity schedules, like you're just leaving a kid alone, right? But I think providing the rationale on why it's helpful at home and then that you're building in social interactions in this controlled way, I really loved. Do you want me to say the things that I would love to change, or do you want me to wait for each chapter?
Let's wait. Wait. Alan, what are you? Okay, Alan, what do you think? What do you think, Alan? What were your thoughts?
I've had this book for a long time. Started when I was in education. So as a teacher that was kind of just stepping into the pool, this was really helpful. And I think there's some things to appreciate that aren't as evident. Like they really talk about embedding in like choice and preference in the early use and like making like pairing basically. They don't ever, I don't think they say this explicitly, but pairing the idea of a picture activity schedule with reinforcement when a learner is younger or first using them, so that it's about like implementing choice and also like just using them as like token systems. And like there's all sorts of different ways that they really emphasize like this should, for younger learners, be about reinforcement, not just about responsibility, which I think sometimes gets lost in our field. That like, we want to teach them a picture schedule so that they can do all their work without having an adult standing over them. But they're children. Like still that need for social interaction and like social oversight makes sense. So I like that. I do like that they embed as much as they can, again, like some ideas of social validity. I don't think in 2010 that was necessarily quite on the forefront of everyone's mind, but they do talk about like, and remember the last step should always be the most reinforcing option that the kid has. And that, and then for like older children and things like that it should be used in a context of like really helping that person be independent so that they feel more confident in their job or in whatever task they're doing. it did also make me pull out the big purple book of just because it really reminded me. I know.
I kept wondering why you had that out. Like, you're like, oh, when I'm not talking, I'm going to read this off camera. I wasn't sure.
You should tell everyone what he's holding.
He's the Relational Frame Theory book by Hayes,
Barnes-Holm, and Roche. Yeah, but it just reminded, because they talk about like sequencing and meaning and all these things, and it just really reminded me of some of the things in one of the chapters in, it's chapter 4 of the RFT book about like how you make meaning through like stories and metaphors. And it just made me think like, this is a really untapped part of RFT, is like, why do visual schedules seem to work better for certain like individuals, and why is that helpful? And there's not really a good account of that in RFT. So it just made me think and wonder, because that's what's on my brain right now. But I think it has a lot of like connections to that, about like picture activity schedules are more meaningful the more meaning that we build into them. So that's what made me think that. And like I said, when I was a teacher, it was a very helpful book.
Yeah. Dana, how about you?
This is a book that I had not read before, but what was interesting to me is I have implemented activity schedules for so long, and I was trained in like a location where clearly this book was the referent for it, because everything that I did and the way that I was trained to implement picture schedules came from this book and the research that was behind it. So although I agree with Jackie that there are updates that I would make to some of the training approaches listed in this book, I was just really grateful that the way I had been trained was not one of those, well, we're doing it this way just because that's the way that it's done type of approaches, but rather it was very clearly rooted in this literature, and we were taking like a play-by-play from this book in the way that we approach teaching picture schedules, including some of the perhaps lesser known elements included here, which I know that we're going to go all into, but things such as distance, fading, social components, uses of timer, fading from pictures to scheduled list, etc. Right? We did all of that. And so this is a great book that if you're like, gosh, I didn't get any of that type of training, you can 100% set up a data-based, evidence-based approach to picture schedules just by reading this book in an afternoon.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've always been hugely in the bag for picture activity schedules. I'm always shocked when I go into programs and, I talk about the idea of, how do the kids learn independent skills? And there's sort of a sense of like, oh, they don't, or we just tell them what to do. And then, they go do it sometimes. But you watch so many people, and I've even seen this over the years when I've trained picture activity schedules or trained individuals to use picture activity schedules with the students in their care. And they miss so many of just the basic principles that would go into why have these schedules. It's just over prompting, constantly telling the kid what to do. No, this toy goes here. This is how to play, trying to show them how to play with it while they're going, which again, there's a time and a place to show children how to play, but not in the interest of teaching them independence. And, then folks are always just bemoaning the fact that so many students turn out just waiting. They just wait all day, waiting for adults to tell them what to do next. And I have just always loved picture activity schedules as an alternative to that. And I think this book captures the big why of that very well, and that it's not about mom and dad need to buy themselves 20 minutes to go do something, do chores while their child stays busy. It's about, there's a benefit of it, but it's really about teaching children who often aren't given that much autonomy a chance to learn how to make meaningful choices. And while the initial kind of links in that skill is going to be these very basic sort of, get the shape sorter and do this simple knob puzzle, over time, it can become a much more advanced skill. And I've seen individuals who have like very advanced schedules where they control the whole thing, they organize their day, and they seem to really just, enjoy that level of freedom that they have because they, understand that their opinion of what they want to do and the order they want to do it matters to the individuals around them, either supporting them or living with them. And I think this book does just a really great job of taking, there's not a lot of, when you look at the research on picture activity schedules, there aren't that many publications. I mean, I think sometimes I feel like I've read them all, and there's maybe, eight or nine, good ones. And again, limited scope. I'm looking at like Java.app, and they just don't get published on them as much. And you sort of wonder, is it just one of those technologies that while there are a few questions left, there's not that many, so nobody wants to publish on it anymore? Like, they kind of answered them all. And you read this book, and other than a few updates to some of the procedures based on sort of how we've shifted practice to be more, more mindful of some of the procedures or some of the prompting in here, it's really like this was it. They solved the picture activity schedule problem back in the 90s, and then here's the final word on the subject. And there are a couple chapters where I definitely had some thoughts, and either research I'd read after this was published that added to the literature base. But really, it feels like if you were interested in doing a deep dive on picture activity schedule research, you could probably just read this book and you'd have gotten almost everything you need to know about it in a very readable and very understandable package that it doesn't shy away from any of like the technological terms. I think it tries to be very upfront with the skills that parents and caregivers will be using. And I think it explains them pretty clearly. There's some, concern about some of the feedback that McClannahan and Krantz give to parents. You sort of read and you say like, I think you might be missing some of it. I don't know if that's going to work. Like, is that as thorough an accounting as need be? But certainly nothing terrible, but some things might be missing a little bit there. But like, as a parent, you could easily read this book and then bam, just go make a schedule, go buy the Velcro. Some good photo taking tips in here as well, even though iPhones and digital cameras were not readily easily accessible at the time.
You remember, you and I have the first edition, I think, of this. So hopefully some of those are updated, because there was like many paragraphs devoted to how one should take pictures with your camera and then take it in to get the film developed.
They didn't go into.
They updated that. That was updated. So luckily that part got updated.
The framing of pictures, I appreciated that. The sense of like, here's how you want to frame it. Here's your background. That's the same.
That is true. You want a really clean picture. Yeah.
They did say that, but they didn't tell us you had to bring it in.
That part, I think Diana's being hyperbolic. You got to drive down to your 24-hour convenience store and leave off your film. Go to your dark room. All that good stuff. I know folks kind of wanted to share some of their more critical thoughts. I had a review I wanted to share by Ruth Ann Rayfelt from The Behavior Analyst of the first edition of the book from 2002, but she does suggest a few updates she'd like to see in the book. So I'd love to hear people's kind of thoughts of things that they'd want to see just briefly now, and then we can come back to them when we're discussing the book. But I don't want to share hers because they were very similar to some of the ideas I was thinking. And I don't want everyone to think we just copied what we read in an article, because we do have our own good thoughts as well.
I haven't read that article, so I won't know.
That's only I will look like a giant fraud. The rest of you are safe. You will look very, very smart. So go ahead, be smart. What would you have updated? Just generally, you don't have to get into all the details, because again, we're going over the book next.
So the two big things that I would update are I would probably take out the whole section on how to have your kid like manual guidance. That part felt creepy to me in an icky way. Right. Only because, it's like making your kid feel more comfortable with adults touching them. And I don't know. And that part, I think you can do it in different ways, right? I think instead of saying, let's always use manual guidance, maybe you use video models, maybe you do more of the modern technologies that we have. Because if you don't like to be touched, you don't like to be touched. So I feel like at that point I got there and I went, ugh. But again, in 2010, right, I understand the rationale. Like, yes, that is the easiest way, but I think there's a lot more creative ways that we could do that.
I think that might be the key there, is that they really focused on that as being like, this is the way you need to teach this. Right. And there may be times in which you do need to teach things via physical guidance, but that's why teaching imitation is so critical of a cusp skill, because once one can imitate, then you open up all the options as far as model prompting goes. But without that, you are super limited. If you have a learner who doesn't imitate and doesn't follow verbal instructions, right? So there may be a time and place for physical guidance, but like you're saying, maybe we don't jump to it first, and we certainly need to determine individually per client what their tolerance for that is, and ways that we can monitor their acceptance of it in the moment too, and be responsive to that if it is a technique that we are needing to use.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't use it, right? Because I think some kids don't mind and they like it, right? You got to watch out for that too. But I mean, I have used physical guidance before when doing picture schedules, and I 100% agree with them that you shouldn't be talking, right? You shouldn't be providing verbal cues. You shouldn't be gesturing. You should be behind the student so that you're not present. I agree with all of those recommendations. It's just like, if they hate manual guidance, let's train them to like it. That part I just think in an updated version, we would probably find different strategies that we could do first.
Right. We would have a different conversation about it,
right?
And I think there's a context too. This book while they sort of mention like, and you could be a caregiver or you could be like a teacher using this book, it really is written primarily it's speaking to parents.
Yeah.
So for parents, they may find it valuable to help their child tolerate touch, and the examples they give when they're talking about, when your child wants to be, they do want to be hugged, or they do want you to help them with something. You can add a little bit more physical contact in it so that they get used to the idea that but you do make a good point, Jackie. It's very different to say, teach a child to tolerate more physical contact with a parent than it is to just teach them of like, all physical contact is good and stop complaining, kid. You shouldn't be bothered by this, or two different, different. I can't think of a noun. They're different.
A noun. Two different. Insert your noun here, Alan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's also one of the places where this is a place where coerciveness could accidentally enter the situation of like teaching them to tolerate manual guidance. That's if you're talking about like being tolerant of like physical interactions with a trusted person and like gaining their assent, sure, which is what we're talking about. But just tolerating manual guidance, it's just they gets into some like a traditional escape extinction kind of things of just let's just put that on extinction, and that's not cool, which they don't really advocate for. But I can see people back filling in that kind of thinking by reading a phrase, practicing manual guidance.
Right. Okay. The other thing that I would modify, these are my two big ones when we get into the articles, into each chapter, then I have little things that I would do, but the two big ones are that one. And the second would be when students aren't engaging in the activity schedule like they should, the authors recommend using punishment in a couple areas. And I'm not really into that. So that seems, if you're giving it to a parent, they haven't really described the side effects of what punishment can do, and it may, and parents and whoever's reading this book, to be honest, is not really equipped to deal with the side effects that punishment can have. And so I would highly caution them. If I was going to rewrite this book, I would take that part out and really focus on reinforcement-based procedures, because we do want the student to like doing their activity schedule, and we want them to find it, something fun and something that they would like to do, and adding in punishment and aversive stimuli like the response costs of the tokens, I think could diminish that and make the activity schedule, aversive in and of itself. Those are my two big things that I would scrub clean. Yeah.
And it really is just the response cost for anyone who hasn't read the book yet. That's what they're talking about.
They talk a little bit about timeout. Or I don't think they don't call it timeout, but they sort of generally refer to.
You posted on the steps.
Yeah, and they do mention it as sort of like use whatever you normally do if your child is misbehaving, and then they kind of hint at it's probably timeout. Like, like every parent in the 90s, when you get your parent manual, they tell you about timeout, right? Everyone's using that, aren't they? So yeah, that one, that's a little. there's, again, a context of if you're using timeout and that works for your family, I guess you're right. It's not a bad plan, but it's not necessarily the only plan. And kind of there's sort of an assumption underlining this whole book of your child totally wants to do a bunch of different activities. They just don't know how to do it without your constant supervision. And if only there were a way. And sometimes they'll talk about the barriers to that. Maybe the child doesn't like some of the activities or they're struggling with some of them. And usually, their suggestions are more about, well, find something they do like rather than, well, make them do it because you want them to do the shape sorter and damn it, they have to. They're required by law at their age. But there are a couple assumptions I think that are made about the audience of the book that I think lend themselves to not getting into as deep a conversation as we would want to nowadays. Talk about some of the procedures. Alan and Diana, any other criticisms before we get into the deep dive?
Similar to Jackie, they also talk about adding in a lot of edible reinforcers and even just like popping them into their mouths as you go.
Yeah,
I didn't love it.
I did that though. I'm going to say it. I've done that.
Yeah.
I have been behind a child, like a young child doing an activity schedule, popped a Skittle right in their mouth. But every time I was like, is it going to go too far back? Am I going to choke them? And so, there
are many reasons.
I didn't love it. I didn't love doing that. Right.
Yeah. And I think including a snack in your schedule is great.
Yes. I love that because everybody loves
activity,
snacks.
Yes, for sure. But that other part, I did not love as much. And we have a whole episode dedicated to that topic, episode 238.
I would say for me, there's just some conceptual stuff that I would like to see added, or one removed. It's only one, but one Lovaas citation is one too many.
I agree. I saw that one too. Yep, I saw that.
And there are much better ways to talk about just what a prompt is than referring to Lovaas's book. And then I would like to see at least some, because they talk about individuals that seem to be case studies of like real people based on the images and stuff. I'd like to see what they think about having learned to use these and what they like and don't like about having these and getting some of that social validity from the people that are using these things for their benefit. So, and I would just say it's also interesting. I don't know if anyone caught it, but at least in our version of the book, the pictures come from Gdansk, Poland, and Istanbul, Turkey, some of them. So, so they're, when you're talking about it being technological, I thought that was interesting, is like these things are being used in other countries across the world. So,
yeah. Oh, right. Well, last but not least, before we get into a deep dive, Ruth Ann Rehfeldt's review was overall positive. Her main criticisms were that she wanted a little bit more looking at older children's schedules, which I think the second edition does have sections on that. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that. And then the idea of the children who might engage in problem behavior and not really talking about function-based treatment for problem behavior or intense, non-compliance. I'm not sure whether Krantz and McClannahan would have said, well, that's not the point of a picture activity schedule. If the child is tantruming when you bring this thing out, then you've done something wrong. Like you're not picking the right activities for the child, or there are steps that are missing. However, I think there are going to be situations where the child both would do the picture activity schedule and has a learning history that has led to high intensity, challenging behavior that precludes them from doing the picture activity schedule. But again, that's not, I think the book is assuming that that's not a huge barrier that you are facing. If you're dealing with high rates of challenging behavior, you're probably not spending a lot of time on your picture activity schedule skills. But you may be, but... and then overall, she wrote, in conclusion, Activity Schedules for Children with Autism, Teaching Independent Behavior is a clearly written, straightforward description of the procedures used to teach children to use activity schedules. The advantages of teaching children to use activity schedules are made obvious, and the gains that a child might make are described in everyday non-technical language. Although some readers may require additional information and professional support, Most parents and teachers should be pleased with this book. And that's from the 2002 review. I always think it's funny when we're doing a book for book club, because I see so few sort of like articles that are book reviews in our journals, and you see them occasionally, and it's always fun to kind of highlight them. And so we caught that one. So if you're listening to this podcast, I know we do. I've been told there are some parents who enjoy listening to it, and certainly some behavior analysts who are parents who listen to it. But if you are mostly listening to this as a BCBA, you should be okay with reading this book and immediately implementing. And we'll go over some of the areas where you may have some additional research or some additional modern updates to your practice that you want to take into account. So let's take a little break. And then when we come back, we're going to do a deep dive into the chapters of activity schedules for children with autism. We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there!
And we are back talking about activity schedules for children with autism book club. Before we do that, though, I want to remind listeners that you can earn 2 CEs for listening to this podcast. You need to finish listening and then go to our website. You can even click the link in the notes section of the podcast player you're using. It'll take you right there. You're going to put in some key information, including 2 secret code words. And don't forget, if you're listening to this as a patron at the $10 and up level, you want to make sure you're on the Patreon page as well, because actually it should be in your special. It's a special version just for you in the podcast notes. You get a 3rd secret code, which is a discount code. So you get a free 2 CEs for listening to this as a thank you for your patronage. But everyone's going to need to put in this first code. It's magnetic, magnetic, magnetic. It's the process by which I never understood magnetism. It's, it's one of the forces in the universe. Positives and negatives attract, all that jazz. But mostly we just thought about it in terms of the magnetic tape on our favorite piece of technology, the Language Master. Very excited to talk about that soon. Magnetic. All right, let's dive deep into the book, starting with Chapter 1, Independence, Choice, and Social Interaction, which is a general background chapter, but I think makes a really great case. And I think we kind of talked about it a lot in our intro section of how picture activity schedules are really great skills for teaching choice making and for teaching individuals to engage in independent, meaningful activities as they grow and develop. They certainly go over the fact that this all comes from their research at the Princeton Child Development Institute. And they're finding that a lot of, they taught so many skills and children learned so many skills. And then when they had no one telling them what to do, a lot of the children just sort of hung around, engaged in stereotypic behavior, and waited until an adult told them what to do, at which time they would, engage in activities, complete all sorts of tasks. And I really love that their thought process there was the quote from page 3, "We did not assume that the children were wrong or incapable of using the skills they had learned. Instead, we assumed that it was important to examine different teaching procedures to enable them to perform activities and tasks independently." So really coming at this from the idea of a picture activity schedule as being something to support learners rather than because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I did like that as sort of a background piece. And it makes me like picture activity schedules even more. And then, of course, our definition, picture activity schedule, just so we're all using the same one. It's a set of pictures or words that cues someone to engage in a sequence of activities. Ta-da. Most of us have probably seen these. It's your little binder with the construction paper, and on every page is a different picture of an item, different picture of an activity. These were used kind of originally in some of the family style group homes back in the 90s, research that Krantz and McClannahan published on. We've talked about it on the podcast before. And they found, it increased on-task behavior and on-task performance and engagement, by, huge chunks, like 91 to 99% of their observation bins, demonstrating on-task behavior. And thus, we should use them. Did I miss anything in chapter 1?
I do want to highlight the one thing in chapter 1 that I love is they, I know you said it, but I just want people to hear it, that they set up that independence, choice, and social interaction piece so that they can reference it in every single other chapter. And I really love that right in this first chapter, they're like, I think these are the 3 things that they really wanted in the world, to come about with picture activity schedules. And so I like that they laid them out in that first chapter so that they can come back to them. And the rationale that we all use schedules, because we do. I'm imagining my life without my planner and without my to-do list, and it would be disastrous, right? I would be lost.
It's so easy to have a to-do list or a schedule, and our phones can just be constantly buzzing when we've got something to do and remind us of these things. We can snooze our reminder. I use my emails like a to-do list. I finally changed the water filter on our water softener, but it was an email I sent to myself with a picture of the part I needed. And every time I do it, I say snooze and come back to me in 6 months when I have to do this again. So because otherwise I'd never do it. I don't do it when it comes necessarily, but I do eventually get to it. Otherwise, we'd have gross, hard water. Yuck.
But yeah, so I think that first chapter is a nice starting chapter to prepare the reader to remind themselves of these 3: choice, independence, and social interaction throughout the book.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because sometimes I think you can get lost in the making of the schedule, and you can get lost in okay, they have to do this, they have to do this, they have to do this. But bringing it back to why, right? To promote choice, to promote independence, and to promote social interaction are the 3 main tenets of why social activity schedules are important.
Yeah. I get devil's advocate. Is there? Oh, sorry, Alan.
No, I was going to say this. I think this would be a great opportunity in an update to potentially introduce CMOs with each of these potentially, because I think that's where with the challenging behavior, if you're not doing it right, that's where the picture schedule is signaled as a what's about to happen is not fun, even if I like what's on the other side of this. So no, thank you.
Mm.
And even in terms of independence, the idea that when you get the schedule, maybe that CMO surrogate of wow, I can accomplish everything I need to accomplish because I can organize it in front of me and I can do it in a way that's manageable to me. And I think that this would have and even for the social interaction, the CMOT, it would just fit in potentially really well right here, and find a way to talk about it may have become aversive if you haven't made it reinforcing enough, if there's not enough choice and things like that. So
yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. So devil's advocate, is there any reason that one should not use or would not use picture activity schedules? Is there anyone that you would say, you don't need to read this book, it's not for you, you're going to hate it, you're never going to use this stuff? Because I find this to be I suppose if you're working in actually, even if you're working in something like OBM, I guess you still would be working on self-management skills and some of these basic principles. You wouldn't do as much graduated guidance with, the CEO of a major company to use their schedule. You'd be doing more modeling. And
I would love that, to get behind a grown person and be they're like, what are you doing? And you're like, what I'm doing right now. And the camera is slowly putting my arms around a grown person and trying to
grabbing
use their
Bob
hands,
Iger's hands and having him start writing in his
putting their
day
wrist and
planner.
be like,
It becomes the
Pay
scene from.
people.
It feels like the scene from Ghost.
Ghost.
Right.
Yep. I'm just going to be Patrick Swayzeing everyone. That's what people are going to pay me to do. Or, which even would be better, is the shadow where you're like, where your hands are up and you're like,
You're hovering.
you're hovering. So just having someone
Yes.
like shadow you all day.
Jeff Bezos, I'm going to be outside the door. It's time to do your CEO schedule. Oh, no.
But all of these things just highlight that it's ridiculous that we talk to adults that way when they have disabilities.
Right.
Yes.
Right?
And so that would,
yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and so for me, it would be you don't need a picture activity schedule for someone who may have some of these skills already. Like it just, I think sometimes in this book is an example of we get hung up on like labels of this, like, oh, autism, therefore picture activity schedule. It's like, well, might be it's not meaningful for this learner because this learner doesn't need it.
Oh, yeah.
So,
right. So picture activity schedules are a gateway, I would say, to other types of schedule making.
Oh, man. I learned by watching you.
Behavior. So in that sense, they're not always appropriate, like Alan is saying. But I think that schedule making is something that almost anyone can benefit from because it then ties into other types of organizational and time management skills that we all continue to utilize and struggle with in varying ways that are ultimately, beneficial for us. So it doesn't have to stay a picture schedule. It can morph into something that is more complex as the person's needs become more complex. So I don't think I would ever say we don't need, this isn't a skill that we could work on in some capacity.
I think I'm going to refer to my to-do list from now on as my activity schedule because it sounds more fun than like, oh, I got all this crap to do. If it's like, I got an activity schedule, I'm going to get finished today.
well, and then I'll be vulnerable here and point out that this is also a place where if you're getting feedback from a learner about a schedule being too hard or too much, like for me, if I'm too vague on my to-do list, I don't get the stuff done. But if I'm too specific, it becomes really overwhelming because I'm like, I have all this stuff to do. So finding that balance between these words are enough to evoke enough of a manageable behavior for me to accomplish to then get to the next step.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good point.
That is a good point. All right. So we all want to use schedule. So we want to keep reading. That's what we're saying. So let's go to chapter 2.
Okay.
I really got a kick out of chapter 2. I mean, some of the later chapters I think had a similar feel, but chapter 2 more than any other prerequisite skills. Is my child ready for an activity schedule? I think just captured this idea of, hey, you're a parent, you're totally capable. Here's a bunch of skills that, I mean, I read them and they're like a to-do list of like, I'm a new employee working at a special education preschool. And it's sort of just like, hey, caregiver, guess what? Here's a bunch of skills they need. If here's how you'll test it. If they don't know it, that's cool. Here's how you'll teach it. And it was very like a positive assumption that you're going to read this book. You can do all these things. It's okay. Because some of these are skills that I feel like are, onboarding training skills. And, you need BST to do some of them properly. And, here they are. Just read this and do this. They're pretty straightforward. And they are. But again, I'd love to see how many parents or caregivers would read this chapter and then be able to do all of these things first time out versus needing additional support from a professional. I think some of them they could, but you never know. Because I've written plenty of things and I'm like, this is easy. Everyone's going to read this and then do exactly that. And then you come back a week later and like, no one understood what you wrote down. I'm glad it made sense in your head, but it didn't make sense to anybody else.
I agree with you.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I would just say it's almost one of those nice times where, again, thinking about a revision of if you've tried this before and it hasn't worked, have you seen this? Like being able to go back and problem solve because maybe you've tried this before, but maybe your child didn't have the prerequisite skills and it's become aversive. It's like, oh, really reinforce this skill. so that you can try again. So it would be a good, because I think that's part of the conceit of the book sometimes, of like, it makes it seem so easy, but it's like kind of the assumption of you have learners for whom this hasn't been made aversive.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. Great point.
Do it right the first time, but it might not be your first time. And it's not your fault if you did it wrong the first time. You may not have known how to do it any differently.
Right.
Just how it is.
I like how they really broke it down into these potential prerequisite skills, all the way to, can your child or can the learner identify where a picture is on a page, right? And they recommend, I think in our version at least, it was like putting sheets of paper in sheet protectors, which still to me seems like a very easy, low-tech solution, but you take like cool stickers and put them in different spots on the page. And so then teach the person to point to the sticker wherever it is on the page, which is, again, something that I have worked on in the past and didn't realize it was tied into this specific set of literature, but I think it might be, to teach them to where to look on a page. Yeah. Because sometimes you forget to break things down to that level, but it can be an important prerequisite skill. So they start with that. They talk about matching identical objects together, and then from there moving to picture-to-object correspondence skills, which I think you can also get kind of bogged down in these things, right? And I've had situations where people were really hesitant to move into, let's say, PECS use or maybe picture schedule use because they were worried about that picture-to-object correspondence. To that, I would say, are the things you're asking them to match super boring? And the issue is not actually picture-to-object correspondence, but rather you accidentally bored your learner to tears, and they're not interested in doing this task because that is an unnecessary hurdle that you have potentially created there. So I think that there's a balance here, right? You want to make sure that your learner is responding in some type of discriminated capacity towards these items, and that you're not then giving them a schedule that's frustrating for them because it's so difficult if they don't know picture-to-object matching. But there also is, a balance where you're like, let's just go ahead and go for it. I think they have the concepts down. Let's not, delay this in that we have to get 89% perfectly across, on all of these things when it's you're really just trying to assess those prerequisite skills. But these writers may disagree with my take.
Well, I agree with that, just because I think for other things, like the visual discrimination component is like having learners you're trying to teach listener responding to, they're not gaining the skill. It's like, well, let's visit like visual perceptual, like just matching. Let's just, are they able to match? If not, then it may just be that like this image is not meaningful. They're not discriminating. What's on the picture? It does like pointing to key or marker or crayon just isn't meaningful because they don't visually discriminate. Oh yeah, that's often a thing I go back to, especially with my early learners.
This is also the section where, again, we talked about in kind of our initial thoughts where the prerequisite of accepting manual guidance is brought up. And we did sort of talk about how that gave us various
feelings,
some ill at ease. I think we all sort of agreed with a lot of the general reasons those would be. I do want to say, in terms of learners who are tolerant of manual guidance and who are being, when that prompt is used for activities that are meaningful, that the child is clearly not showing signs of frustration or that that touch is aversive or what they're being asked to do is aversive, there is a real benefit to it as a prompt when it is used properly using kind of graduated guidance and then the distance fading procedures that they describe in later chapters to getting children to independently use picture activity schedules. I know I had a year where I think everyone had a picture activity schedule in a classroom I consulted to, and you'd watch people doing them and it'd just be constant point prompt, point prompt, point prompt, point prompt. And these were children who didn't have high rates of severe challenging behavior. They liked tickles. They liked being held. So they were very tolerant of manual guidance. So that was not an issue we were worried about. And when I showed them, here's how you could do it without pointing, getting yourself out of the picture, get out of the way, and just use the graduated guidance procedure, every single learner, and I might be exaggerating about average, but I'm pretty sure it was every single learner ever. No, every single learner in that classroom was able to independently do a picture activity schedule in a matter of a week or two, versus they'd been doing the same couple steps for months and months and months. And I'll assume that is totally accurate data that I'm remembering from over a decade ago. I'm not exaggerating at all. It was just a magic. All about graduated guidance. And
at
then
the end of the week, they all give you a standing ovation.
It was a slow clap when I left. It was really amazing. Clear eyes, clear hearts. Can't lose. Yeah. It was real touching moment. But everyone could use the picture activity schedule. They all enjoyed it.
But I think I found it common to use the verbal cues, right? So when I've gone and seen people do picture activity schedules, they'll be like doing a ton of verbal cues. And I remember one time I was consulting, I'm like, did they teach you how to use the verb? Did they tell you to use verbal cues? And they're like, oh yeah. And I'm like, okay.
So Jackie, did you, when that happened, say, I'm going to show you how to use a different prompt, and then use graduated guidance on the adult who's also using graduated guidance on the child?
Yes, of course.
And a human centipede of activity schedule prompting?
Of course. My job is to Patrick Swayze. That's what people call me.
And the people are like, I don't like being touched. Like, shh, I'm gonna show you. It's gonna be a very romantic moment we now share with the schedule.
Put my hand around and put my finger up to their lips and go.
Get the Everly Brothers playing.
By the way, not true.
Yeah, right. So because the thought is that it's harder to fade verbal prompting. But why is that though?
I think when they wrote this book, it's like the verbal prompt isn't matching the topography of their response, and so you're supposed to use prompts. Okay. I have heard research wise, right? You're supposed to use prompts that match the topography of the response. So when you fade them out, it's more realistic, right? But the verbal prompt, I think verbal prompts are a lot like instructions because that's what they are, right? So students, I think, wait. I mean, one of the problems why you want to do the activity schedule is students wait for someone to tell them what to do. So if you're adding in verbal cues, it's just like another instruction. So you're actually taking out the opportunity for students to be independent, which I found.
When I think that, when they talking about that, if your verbal prompt can be replaced with just a tone to next step, probably not an effective, it is more of an instruction, you wouldn't have that. That was why do we have a tone in the middle of a visual schedule? And so just the idea that I think the physical guidance, and by the way, just because people might not have read this book, when they're talking about getting your child to accept manual guidance, for the most part, they're just talking about being playful and getting them to enjoy physical social interaction. But it's that for the purpose of getting them to accept manual guidance, it's just a little gross. I think but they're just talking about helping them climb on a chair before they get a piggyback ride. It's okay, well, that's actually how I would teach that.
Let's agree we're only going as far in terms of prompting in this as you would as a parent of let me show you how to do. I'm going to help you.
Very common
hand over hand, young child
kids. Yeah. I think a modern update might be to teach folks how to respond to the question, "Can I help you do this?" Right, which would be nice. Yeah. Okay, or that helps me a ton.
Yeah, even just the signal that that my physical contact isn't going to be coercive and avoiding coercive physical interactions while doing manual guidance and graduated guidance.
Yeah, it's a big difference between I'm going to teach you to do your schedule of activities that you enjoy and I'm going to make you do this thing that you have to do because I've arbitrarily decided they must be done. That's if someone's not liking that prompt, it is more about you're making them do something uncomfortable as opposed to I just don't like being taught. It could be both, but it certainly is more likely I don't like what's going on. This whole situation is bad. So keeping in that mindset. Now we could look at and some updates. I can't remember if we've had if there's been any published video modeling to teach the use of schedules research. I feel like that would be tricky in that it might just teach how to play with the items that are in the schedule, but I don't know if there's been any research on using other techniques to teach the use of schedules at this age. Now, certainly if an older student or a student who is able to learn through verbal instructions, and I have had students where I say, this is a picture activity schedule. The pictures in it tell you what you should do. Here, watch me. And then I say, you can do it, and you can put in whatever toys you want and then do them. And I have had kids who are like, oh, great. And then they set up the schedule and they use it. And I showed them like once or twice. And I never had to use manual guidance. But those were very specific learners where I really was more just teaching them a routine than necessarily an activity schedule. Though, again, I think they're kind of the same when you think about it's just a different level of complexity. But for a learner who doesn't tend to gain instruction through only imitation or through only verbal instruction, I'd like to see whether something like, I don't know if video modeling would necessarily get the same results as the manual guidance. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be using it.
You know what, Rob?
What?
My next research. There you go.
Go. I'm glad. It's my favorite activity is telling people research I'd like them to do so I can read it later. I won't do it, but someone else could. That's great. Thank you.
Just from a cursory glance of the research, it looks like a lot of it is just about using video modeling within visual schedules.
Yes, absolutely. Not to teach it. Yeah.
So,
and that part I'm not like, I know video modeling can be very effective for teaching the individual skills within it. It's that sort of overarching nested nature of using the schedule itself that I feel like there must be some way to translate it. We have so many like new ways. Our technology kind of has these like proprioceptive ways or virtual reality. I'm sure there's some other ways, but then it starts getting into like, that's a lot of money and time for something that there's only so many students who it really like, you cannot use manual guidance, and to make them learn to tolerate it is not an appropriate goal. Like it might be a small subset. I'm not sure. And then also some suggestions here to end this chapter on what materials to use. And ideally, you have taught your child, or your child knows how to engage in a number of materials right off the bat. But again, I think a strength of the picture activity schedule is even if they have no leisure activities that they are able to independently engage with, as long as they're not aversive or they hate those activities, you can kind of get away with like, well, they know they'll be able to learn the skill. And then here's a bunch of toys that I think they'll like, or they've seemed interested in, they just don't interact with independently. You probably are okay. All right. Chapter 3. What should be, well, the chapter is called Preparing a First Activity Schedule. So this chapter, and whoever wants to take it, what should be in your first schedule?
All right. One thing I also love is that they do give those real life student examples in the front of every chapter. I think that's fun.
They're little like vignettes, right?
Yeah.
Vignettes. Yeah. Okay. So the first thing that they talk about is selecting activities. They say that the first photoactivic schedule that they have might include a few games, and then usually will end with a snack, which I agree. I mean, I think everything should end with a snack, to be honest. Right? And they do say that they don't have to be mastered, but it does help learn the schedule if they are mastered. And they make the point that activities should be age appropriate, so that when the student's doing it independently, they will appear skillful and competent. I think if a student likes to do something else that's not age appropriate, they should still be able to do it in their schedule, depending on where they are. So that,
especially like a first schedule, because the goal is just, here's how this works. If they like toys that like, well, you couldn't do this schedule at your job site because you might be, it might take away some of your dignity because you're working with other adults. Okay, fine. But like, who cares if you're just practicing a new skill? Whatever's going to make it more fun, that's what you should use. And if you're at home,
right? If you're at home and this is something you enjoy doing, by all means, do it. And so that is one of the revisions that I would make in this section, albeit minor, right? But I think with adjusting with our times, I do love all of their little, like, here's what I've made with numbers and pictures, because I remember making those with numbers and pictures and file folders. And man, they served a really nice purpose. So they said that it doesn't have to be long. They don't have to be intensive. They can just be very quick, discrete activities in these first times of doing a schedule. I just love, they also said, you don't have to be crazy. Like, just go to your local toy store and find a toy that you think your kid will like.
And
nice,
then closed-ended, It's usually best for those first schedules.
Yep, close-ended. And then they said that
use little boxes to keep all the materials. I love that. Like little pro tip. Like don't make it hard for your child to like get the materials out and like dropping everything all over the place. That's not fun.
They give that vignette of the kid who's like, I had a really hard, beautiful wooden box, and the kid kept dropping it on the floor. And then when I changed it to a nice box, like a lightweight box, which didn't look as nice, it went much faster. So that was a fun vignette. I don't know if that's in this chapter. I bet it is. And then we've talked about it too, is ending the schedule with a snack or play activity and trying to reserve that special snack or play activity for just the schedule while they're learning how to do it. They do have a little next little blurb about taking pictures. They do talk about digital cameras and printers now. As of
that wasn't in our version,
right? They said that you would want to make sure that you still make it on a plain background, right, with nothing else, to make sure they're attending to the ticket. They also said that you could bracket your exposure. So this is new. This definitely wasn't in yours because it's a digital camera. Take one picture on the best camera setting and then take 2 or more at faster or slower shutter speeds.
No, shutter speeds. I mean, that's a camera thing. That's a real camera. You can do that.
You can do that with your digital camera too.
Yeah, nobody does because you just can click.
No, but you could. And then you pick the best picture, right? And I think the important piece here is that you don't throw away pictures of mastered items, because you can always use them in different places like grandma's house or on trips. So I liked that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alan.
They do also reference commercially available photo libraries. So it's like you could also just find acceptable photos online or in a database.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it can be hard to find a photo that meets these specifications.
Because
I have done my fair share of Googling for this purpose as well, and it's there's always like something weird in the background,
or it's like a weird. They do like the thirds thing, so it makes the pic. It's like that's a prettier picture, but I don't want the picture for its artistic and aesthetic value. I want it to be a clear cue to signal behavior.
Yeah, they have a nice figure that kind of summarizes preparing the first activity schedule with your materials needed, including your token system. They remind you about the social interaction activities, how to set up your home environment, and then like what you need for the schedule in this nice little figure 3.4. I love myself I love it when they give me like a summary in a table. I'm like, did you really have to write that then? Because it's like right there, but it's fine.
They probably felt the same way.
Yeah. They probably did. And then they have a section on identifying and preparing rewards. And I think this is one of the places where they talk about edibles. They also talk about how to design a token system. And I think here there's some more updated research on using token systems. So this might be a place where we could do some update revisions on the effectiveness of token systems and how you might establish a token system before you do this, right? And not while you're doing it.
Right. Yeah.
So, Alan, do you have something?
Oh, yeah.
I was just saying, I think this is something. Yeah, just another interesting point of research would be, I think a lot of the setup side can be replicated on like an iPad. But that also made me think of like, I've worked with curricula and stuff that had like a visual schedule as part of like what's on the screen. But I do wonder if like the physical picture and token interaction is more meaningful than just swiping like an image on a screen. I don't think there's a lot of research on that.
Like pulling it off.
Yeah.
Hearing.
But the only thing I can think of that might be is there's the research that like writing physically or typing on a typewriter is more meaningful to like most people in terms of their memory and what they do than typing it in a word processor or online. But I could see that connection. So that would be an interesting just to see like, could this be really made high tech? And if not, well, then we should still be using, because sometimes it feels a little ridiculous to be like, I have all these pictures and all these Velcro dots. but
Yeah.
they're meaningful to the kids. They're nice low-tech options. So
I had so many Velcro dots. I had
Yeah.
so many Velcro dots all over the
Those
place.
things are not cheap either.
No, there's a cost there. I mean, it's not astronomical.
I think the same conversation can be had when discussing using physical PECS book and symbols versus AAC on a device. And I would say it really depends on the learner. So I've had some learners for whom it seemed as though they needed to go through the learning of the exchange that occurs with the PECS symbols in order to kind of have that take on the meaning that is communication, and others for whom we started that and then very quickly were able to move over to an AAC system, and they clearly like got it right away. So I would guess that there's probably a similar profiles that would have the same issue for picture schedules on a device where they might need to learn that series first with the physicality of an actual picture schedule binder, and others for whom you could just present it on the device and they would just take off running with it. Since we're on the topic, ChoiceWorks is a great one for doing a digital schedule on your device.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a parent, I guess you sort of have to choose which way you want to go based on what you think your child will like and then see what happens. But again, if you're a practitioner, I don't see any reason you wouldn't start with a physical schedule, because you can probably use that initial schedule for tons and tons and tons and tons of clients. And then if you find once they've learned the initial schedule that they seem to like doing the electronic one, okay, great. That's pretty cheap and easy to put together. But once you make one schedule, you can just keep using that schedule for forever. If you have, 30 pictures and pre-Velcroed pages, that initial schedule is good to go.
So, and do we agree with their standard of putting the soft loops on like the manipulative and the hooks on the surface?
I do. Yeah, I do, only because I have cut myself on those hard Velcro circles. So I like it when they're not on the actual on the thing that I'm going to be touching, because I had switched them around and I was like, it's not a big deal. And I actually got myself a Velcro circle cut, because the hard stuff I was pulling too hard and it cut me.
So you wanted the opposite of what they say in the book, because they say to put the hooks on the item and the loop,
no way.
which is the soft.
No.
See, I agree with them, because we just need a standard. I think that is my big thing about Velcro.
So you and I disagree. We're like toilet paper buddies, right?
We got to get the UN on this, universal Velcro design.
It's kind of tongue in cheek, but it really is, because it's one of those things of just like, I have all of these reusable materials. I can't use them with this thing because the Velcro doesn't match. So just going to throw that out.
The way
there
you're
as a
describing
joke.
it, because I worked in a lot of places where they have like little cubbies or study carrels, and they've got that kind of like carpety wall, and one of the sides you can jam you Velcro it, and you can just stick them right onto the wall to use them as like a storage area. Is that that's hard side on the picture?
Yeah. So fine. You know what, guys? You know what? Y'all can go work together, and I will work alone and risk hurting myself.
I'm happy to be flexible as long as we remember and give that same feedback to everybody in our classroom.
So Jackie, can you describe, your new company you've opened? What's the general guiding principle that you have here? Really curious.
We use mullet toilet paper and Velcro on the specific side.
What's mullet toilet paper?
Mullet toilet paper is when the toilet paper, you pull it from the back and not from the front. I have a very serious and significant stance on this, so much so that when I go to my parents' house, I switch it.
You want it in the back?
Yeah.
So what Jackie's saying is most of her opinions at her company are wrong, and no one should go.
I agree with Jackie on that, because it's harder for children, and it's harder for children or pets to unroll the entire roll if it's a mullet.
Yeah.
So what's it called? What's the opposite of a mullet? Bangs?
Fringe.
That's fringe. It's usually bangs, but it's wrong. That's what I call it wrong.
I'll tell you my journey on this. I used to get really stressed out about which way that it should go and which way was the quote unquote right way. And then I realized that for me, I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
So
that was really liberating.
I
For
care.
me. Which way it goes, and I put it both directions.
The only wrong way is sitting on top of the roll because the other ones run out.
Yes. That's bad.
Unacceptable.
But here's the real question, guys. Where do you put the Velcro on your toilet paper? Is it the hard loops or the software?
The hard loops.
And on that, let's get back to the book. Thanks, Rob.
Okay, so the last two sections of this chapter, I'm going to go over one, and then I'm pretty sure that someone else is going to want to talk about the last one because it's the more fun one. Is designing the environment is the first of the last, and that they're just saying like make sure everything's put away, it's organized, there's not clutter, students can access it really easily, they're in labeled bins, right? You'd want to start it in the order that they are in the schedule. You can obviously, then they make the caveat here that of course you can change that up later when they know what they're doing, but don't do it now. And so if you're going to be doing it in other areas, just make sure everything is in the place where it's supposed to be to promote success. And then the final thing to talk about. Oh,
before we get to the final one, Jake, I just want to say, folks, it is important that no matter why or who your child is or how they learn, they should have a definite place where they can do their work, and ideally they can easily get supplies. So I think that is very true, regardless of whether you are, trying to teach an autistic preschooler to use a picture activity schedule, or you are just trying to do any work with your children. There should be a dedicated space. Now, I say that knowing that our dedicated spaces for our children just have lots of crap on them, and then they end up at the dining room table, which is nice and open. So it's not like we're amazing at that all the time, but the more you can build those types of routines for any reason, you always should. And if this is the excuse you need to really make a good study, learning, play area, great, good, go for it. But you should have one in your house as much as you can. It doesn't need to even be that fancy. Just semi not cluttered, and a couple of the things you need are just easy to get to. Like that's all.
Okay, and the final little spot here is preparing to teach social interactions. And I know that I shouldn't be the one to talk about this because everyone else is so excited about the mini-me voice recorder. So take it away, Robin Allen.
Oh, man. This is the best. So the oldest piece of technology mentioned here is in the social interaction skills section. Now, in general, including social interaction skills, as Jackie had kind of mentioned back in chapter 1, it comes up in chapter 1, it comes up in chapter 3. There's a whole chapter on it again near the end of the book where they kind of come back to these ideas. But you should have social interaction schedules as early as possible within your schedules. Now, the challenge...
Which disproves the idea that picture schedule is only so that your child will be occupied away from you.
Exactly.
Right? Which can be a criticism.
Yeah. And these could just be easy pictures of, holding up a hand. That means say hi. It could be, a symbol that your child uses or an action your child uses to communicate a social bid, like arms up for pick me up. If your child is able to read certain sight words, you could use sight words, or you could use, I'm not sure exactly how this would translate into modern technology, but at the time you could put these little cards with magnetic strips into the schedule, where the child picks out the card out of the schedule and slides it through a machine called the language master, and it will then generate the sound. You could do this with a lot of ways. You could do like a lot of programmable buttons. You could probably do this with now. You could probably have a picture on a speech generating device that the child has access to readily. These are going to be the more modern and easy technology. But I was questioning this really great old magnetic tape technology. Is it still available? And so I researched it. And yes, you can purchase a language master. You can get newer ones. They're like $300. But I checked eBay. If you want to go with some old ones, I don't know if they still work, but you want to go with some old ones from like the 80s or whatever, like $50, $60. So if you read this book and you say, I have to do exactly what's in the book, that's how I rigidly process procedures, you could still use the language master. And there was something I think that was really cool about the tactile nature of, I'm going to take this card and then engage in a social bid using the card. Like, that's kind of cool. I think you could do it more cheaply with a lot of modern technology now, but at the time, like, what an amazing addition to your schedule, a chance for your child to communicate through, an AAC, kind of a old school AAC device.
Well, and it did make me think of, and actually an AAC device I've seen even at conferences in like vendors areas now of like 3D printed tactile things that have RFID built into them. So you just bring the item to like the square, and if they put it in there, it emits the speech. Like, I think there are some high-tech things. Because my worry about incorporating this in with like an iPad or something is then it's like, well, why don't we just do the whole thing on there? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So it's like an amiibo?
Yeah, that's how you unlock all the skins in Mario Kart is you need your amiibo.
Yeah.
It's an activity all children love.
Yeah. But it was meant to be like and they're almost always more 3D printed or like plastic injection molded things for like maybe learners with like visual impairment so that they can also like they can see what they're and examine it, and then they just touch it to the talker and it says the word.
That is cool.
So I was like, this actually reminds me that there are more modern technologies that are still not just using an iPad or a Voca or that kind of thing.
Oh, wow.
That's awesome.
That's really cool.
Yeah. But in any case, have this, and in your social interactions, again, it could be physical interaction. It could be, they have some kind of anecdotes later as, children are getting more advanced with their schedules. It could be like a picture that stands for like, go talk or go gain attention, where the child actually goes over with the schedule and it goes like, look, mom, or, look, dad, or look, your older brother, whoever, I did this and I did this. And I said, and then, opportunities for you to, as the caregiver, to be excited. Not ask them questions, not make it aversive, just be like, oh, like your color, I love colors, or those are great colors. Things that might lead to more what we think of as kind of like natural interactions through the use of this schedule in a way that I think is more natural and more fun than a lot of ways that I think people sometimes want to just, force children to interact with them, to tell them about what they did. Tell me about what you did at school today, being just a question that I know I ask my kids, but I care that they talk about it, but if they're not interested in talking about it, I don't, then just ask them a million more questions because they don't like that either.
I did like that they highlighted, don't ask more questions, because that is a quick way to make it aversive, but just comment on what they're saying and elaborate on what they're saying.
Yeah. But whatever the complexity of the social interaction, there should be a social interaction. There should be a couple, closed-ended fun activities. Talked about the picture framing, and then the end, something really fun, usually a snack. I suppose it could be a special game, but those would be the things you want on your first schedule. But how will we teach that schedule? Let's go to chapter 4, a different way to teach.
Actually, I just want to interrupt because that technology I'm talking about is actually public domain and is in like the free and low cost stuff, the RFID stuff. It's called the Voice It by Volkswitch, and it's something that you can like build at home, but you have to have like the 3D printer and stuff. But it's made to be like accessible public domain technology. So I'm not just advertising it to somebody. Like it actually is like a project.
And I will add to that in our town, our library has a 3D printer, and if you create the design, you can go in and get it printed there.
Yeah, I think we have them in at least 2 of our elementary schools in our town too. Maybe more. I know I saw 2 the other day, and I said, "Oh wow, look at those!" All right, let's talk about graduated guidance and fading now. Did anybody else? No, that's good. I'm on a new computer and I always forget that there's a sound that it'll make. Did anyone else? I've always sort of just taken graduated guidance to be the combination of the manual guidance, the graduated guidance, and the spatial fading. I've always kind of just smooshed it together into one super prompt rather than the way it's broken down here, where it's you start with manual guidance, then you do graduated guidance, then you do spatial fading, then you do shadowing, then you do decreasing physical proximity. I kind of did everything, and then I did the decreasing physical proximity in my prompts. Did anyone else do that too, or is that just me?
I consider graduated guidance to be that entire strategy. So maybe that's incorrect, but that's always how I thought of it. I have almost only used graduated guidance in the context of teaching activity schedules. I think because that's where you see the bulk of it in the literature is related to teaching activity schedules. And again, the way I was taught to do these was like pretty much by the book. It can be an effective strategy if one is planning to use physical guidance, in that you are, it's a little bit least to most in that you're only going in to provide assistance as needed, but you're very, very, very much like right there on top, waiting. So it's like that like hovering kind of response almost, and only providing as much prompting as is needed. So if steps are completed, can be completed independently, they're allowed to be completed independently. But then if an error occurs, you move right in immediately and provide the most restrictive prompt in order to ideally prevent the error from finishing or to correct it. And then as you can, yes, you would do spatial fading. So like that's the way in which I have conducted it before. So I think I hit a lot of these points, but I don't often assign graduated guidance as the prompting strategy, because I have found that the trying to get procedural integrity on this teaching procedure is challenging, because it does require a lot of in the moment decision making that's just really hard to capture on paper, and then also I think for people to implement with fidelity.
I mean, I've always sort of done I start with manual guidance, and just like it's in the book, but throughout the context of every activity. So usually you're looking at, I can't remember if it's in this chapter or the next chapter, you really are looking at what are the steps of doing the schedule. You turn the page, you touch the picture, you get the item, you interact with the item, you put the item away, you turn the page, you touch it, and sort of you repeat each of these steps. So each of these steps is one that can be done independently or with prompt, or there could be an error. And I've always done it as I start with manual guidance to begin the schedule. And as soon as the child is sort of like Ouija board style, starting to demonstrate, their physical movement towards what I would assume is the next, what they're supposed to be doing next, I start fading my prompt. I start doing the spatial fading kind of to the forearms. And as they keep engaging appropriately, I move kind of to the shoulders, and then I kind of back off. So I'm right behind them and shadowing. And then, yes, as soon as they either start making a mistake or they don't engage in the next step in the chain of events for 10 seconds, I go right back to manual guidance, and then I sort of fade out the same way throughout the process. Whereas in the book, it's very much you do manual guidance until you're like, I think they've got all the steps. Then you do the graduated guidance, which is pretty much manual guidance shadowing more so, where you're just like not using as much of your own, I don't even know what it would be. You're not manually guiding quite as much, like you're doing a lighter and lighter touch, but it's still kind of manual guidance. Then you do spatial fading where you're moving to the forearms and then to the shoulders. And I don't know if it just at some point someone said, let's just cram these together and make a little package prompt. And no one ever felt it worked worse than doing these all as individual steps or not. But I don't think there's any reason to say like, well, there's research to point to one of these is better than the other or fast. I would assume faster. But there are also like a lot of research when you're comparing two types of prompts. It might be one's kind of faster, but at the same time, a lot more errors or potential for errors, which can add time. So I don't actually know if one really should be using exactly these prompts. I know I have not used them quite like this, and I have been able to teach a lot of learners to use picture activity schedules. So that's anecdotal, but I don't know.
I think the one place I have seen maybe things used like this is the gradual guidance without the spatial fading, at least immediately, is changing from graduated guidance to like a parallel model kind of at the same time with something like hand washing, where you wouldn't include the spatial fading and everything immediately, because you're still remaining proximal to provide like physical assistance and things like that. But it's also just keep doing what I'm doing. So... But yeah, I found it odd that they teased those out.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe there's another. I don't know. That feels like a research question that nobody cares that much about. Just to know for sure which one is faster, I guess it's something that could be looked at. But in any case, you've got your initial instruction, and then you will use some combination of manual guidance and then graduated guidance and then spatial fading. Whether you do them all kind of at once or whether you do them all individually, I guess is up to where you work and what you'd like to do. And you're just going to look at your data to support that you did or did not make the right choice. I suppose it's easy to say, what if you just do the kind of package prompt that we're describing, because the worst thing that happens is the child does not seem to be gaining as much independence. And then you can always go back and just do the manual guidance, and then just do the graduated guidance, and then just do the spatial fading. You always go back and do it slower. I suppose. They have a nice do's and don'ts table with a lot of don'ts that drive me nuts. Don't talk to the kid during the picture activity schedule unless it's part of their initiation to you. Don't gesture, which again, I feel like, so I've had so many people that just gesture, and then they're like, why does the kid not learn this dumb schedule? And it's, then I like Jackie, I ghost it, and we prompt it properly, and everything's great after that. Make sure you stay out of the way, which I didn't think of that one. But if you're standing where the materials are, or you keep like being where the child needs to be, you're potentially adding yourself as a cue for continuing to use the schedule in a way that you are not intending, or the way that you would not like it to be in the future, because you don't want to have to be a part of the schedule later.
And that's really the issue here, is that you don't want to establish yourself as a discriminative stimulus for engagement in the schedule, but rather transfer stimulus control over to the schedule itself and then the activities. And that's why, I too have seen a lot of schedules where the person is sitting across from the student, like at the table, and attempting to prompt from over there. And that's not the position you want to be in, because
now you're just prompting inefficiently and not teaching independence.
Yes. So that's why it's from behind, and it's intended to be, little taps as lightly as possible, so that you have a better chance of fading yourself out.
Yeah. Just real quick, so everyone does get to hear what is graduated guidance described as in the book, rather than our description of how we use it. You lightly rest your hands on the child's hands, and when you start to feel them responding independently, you use their responses to temper how much guidance you use. And then again, you can go back to manual guidance if errors occur. So again, like we described, it's sort of like, that Ouija board feel like I'm letting go a little bit, but I can always go back to manual guidance. And then the spatial fading is the quote, gradually changing the location of your manual prompts to, they suggest wrists, I would say above the wrists. You don't want to prompt anyone on joints. Then forearm, upper arm, elbow, shoulder. And you can kind of use, and again, they talk about graduated guidance as separate than spatial fading here. And then shadowing is a separate step where you're just following their movements closely, but not touching the student. Again, I'm not quite sure why this level of splitting hairs between these sort of prompting hierarchies and how they intertwine, but that's how they wrote it.
I guess for fidelity purposes, because again, this is for people who don't have experience with these, and be like, you should also think about like fading yourself out and fading your proximity, and making sure that independence is real with these steps. So I guess from that angle, it does kind of make sense.
Yeah. But as you get good, you can package them all together. And then you just want to be aware of errors occurring. And we talked about it's either like 10 seconds with no moving along with the chain of events, or if an error starts to occur, you immediately move back to manual guidance and prompt, and then sort of continue through your steps. I know there's a lot of reference to sort of what if a child engages in stereotypy or is inappropriately playing with objects. And they do mention that it may be that they just need support in learning how to interact with the object, but it may also be that this is an object that this is how the child wants to play with it, and it may not be a good object for this initial picture activity schedule.
Yeah, or you could have the like fun activity at the end be free play with this object, so that there's no restriction on how one chooses to interact with it.
Or as you teach later on, we'll some of the later chapters we won't go into as much depth, but when you're teaching to do open-ended activities, you could have some activities where the child has periods where they can engage freely in stereotypic play, stereotypic vocal noises or play, if that's something they'd be interested in.
Interfering with the completion of the schedule, it's not an issue.
Yeah.
That's when
it could be part of it, so you could potentially make it part of a schedule.
I have a child that is not on the spectrum and engages in low tone humming 24 hours a day. If anyone has hung out with us, she's always like all day long, every day, even in school. And they've just said, can you be a little bit quieter in school? And she says, yes. So she's a little bit quieter. So it doesn't interfere, right? But low tone all the time, 24 hours. I think she even does it when she's sleeping. singing, and I wouldn't stop her from doing it. She's going to be an artist. I'm just telling you.
Yeah. Well, and I would even just say that maybe, especially since we're talking about children, that would be a great way to make a visual schedule not aversive is to, well, if we're still working on shaping play and getting a variety of responses of play responses, but you also want to use your visual schedule, well, let's not pair those things.
Yes.
Yeah.
They have a lot of great ideas in here too on activities that can be included in the schedule, and they don't have to be structured play activities, right?
Yeah.
So, stacking the pegs together, which I guess that's structured play, but like doing a matching file folder task or doing a color worksheet, doing like tracing lines or something like that. So things that are, have a clear beginning and end, which is really important characteristic for early schedule following, but we don't have to get into the quagmire that is play.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to chapter 5, measuring schedule following. And we've talked about a lot of these pieces, so we're not going to go into too much detail. Really, just the idea, like we already mentioned, the data that they recommend you collect is on, student open schedule, turns page, looks at and points to a picture, obtains the depicted materials, completes the activity, puts the material away, and you get a plus. They just say plus or minus. So if they get a prompt, it's a minus. If they are doing it independently, it's a plus. They make a really good case for why would parents potentially want to take data on this skill. And really the idea that, well, if you're getting minuses, it'll help you know, like, where is there a problem with the schedule where you might need to make changes? And also, how will you know when it's time to do something different with the schedule if you're not collecting this data? And then, they describe some simple things. How would you draw a graph? And how would you get IOA, which I thought had the most romantic idea of, you could ask your partner to do IOA with you and, make a date night of it. Really sweet.
Aw.
I hope that they had done that in the past, right? They're like, let's date night.
I will say though, like, I never feel like this book talks down to parents.
No.
Right? But it goes down so smooth. Like, they describe everything in such a clear, respectful way for families, and it is so technological, like you said, Jackie, but not in a way where you get really bogged down or feel condescended to or confused. It is a great model, I would say, of the tone and the level of detail that one should take when creating manuals for parents. And this chapter is a good example of that too. Even as something as like dry as data collection, it, to me, it just, I just ate it up like candy. It read so easy.
They talk about phase change lines with your prompts, or how do you, putting arrows to show when you changed your prompts, from graduated guidance to spatial fading, when you changed what was in the schedule. And then they have a really nice quote about how you can use your graph besides just information on page 57. One of the most important things to do with the graph is to display it. Just as, in brackets, your child needs rewards for learning to follow his schedule, you also need rewards for your hard work in helping him acquire these important skills. And I think it's sweet. They are behavior analysts who were trained, back in the day, because the idea that like everyone's going to see a graph and they're going to be so happy. I don't know if as many people, I think, I don't know if our generation has found that to be as reinforcing a reward as we would like it to be when we show people graphs.
I think the acceleration chart people feel the same way currently.
They're taking it back old school, the acceleration charts. That's the fun thing for, like Jared.
That's right. Yep. Shout out to Jared Van. Like, once people see this graph and see the acceleration chart in the data, they're going to be
acceleration charts are for young people. I don't have time. I need an Excel graph.
Oh, goodness.
All right. Chapter 6. The first schedule is mastered. That's the name of the chapter. What do we do next?
I like that they point out in the very first paragraph that move on, want something, because if you keep using it, once it's mastered at that level, I don't like the way they word it, but that it's going to get dry and your child might not engage with it as much anymore. Or as they say, the young person's performance may decline if the same tasks are presented again and again at the same order.
Mm-hmm. Everyone likes new stuff. All right. So the criteria that they set out is 80 to 100% correct on the steps of the schedule. And the parent has moved 8 to 10 feet away, is demonstrating that this schedule is mastered. Again, like Jackie said, like they said in the book, that schedule can go to grandma's house, or that can be the sort of like, I threw it in a bag and, I have those items when I got to go, go to the ball game or whatever. You can pull it out at other times. But that schedule is done in terms of the instructional component. So you can start a new activity sequence, because again, the goal here, and I think this is another thing, I think we talked about how do people sometimes misunderstand how activity schedules should be used. It's not about teaching a child to just rotely go through the steps of the same 5 to 6 activities. It is about learning to read a schedule and engage with the activities in a meaningful way. So you can start changing the order of those mastered activities, would sort of probably be the first step. You might be able to jump ahead, but they recommend just take what you have and rearrange the pictures.
And I would not delay in getting to this step, right? Because the longer that you keep it the same, the more likely you're going to see potential challenging behavior in the context of switching it up.
And I was so surprised that it even came up as a problem, because very rarely have I seen one of these used so that the same sequence of things is used in the exact same order. But I could see how people could overcorrect and be like, no, like I'm teaching them to use it, like this thing in this order. I get it. But I was like, I've never have used visual schedules to teach the exact same. It kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah. I have always switched it up from the beginning.
Yeah.
As long as I had enough, materials to change the order of, and then as soon as there was a new activity that was like quote unquote mastered on its own, then it got added into the rotation. But for some learners, maybe that could be too much. I think they're really trying to lay out like the most basic approach, which is keep it the same and then start adding both of those two variations. So change up the order and then add in new activities that are mastered.
Yeah. And then at that point, you just keep adding new activities until you have a schedule that is about, like developmental age wise, the length of time that, you like your child to be independently engaged. So like preschoolers, it's usually about 15 minutes. Second to third graders, they say about 30 minutes. Again, that some of that's going to change based on, your child. Your child might be able to engage longer. They might need a little bit of a shorter schedule, but those are some general benchmarks for, how many activities you add. Like you don't just go ad infinitum with activities in your schedule. And then again, you may have to go back and reteach the schedule. And certainly, I think you see this in some of the later research on using like recess schedules. You'll have learners who have learned like 3 or 4 great schedules inside. Then you take them outside and give them a recess schedule. And you got to start the whole process again. You need to reteach the use of the schedule. So there may be some limits. It does seem like there are some limits to how much the use of a schedule generalizes as a skill to like, well, now that I can use a schedule, you can put anything in there and I'll independently engage. Like there usually will be some amount of retraining. It may be shorter retraining. It may be that if you do enough schedules with enough activities in enough places, you do get to a point where like, hey, this is a totally brand new schedule with 10 new activities and I don't have to do anything. I just give it to the student. They say, sounds great. And they engage and they do all of them without any additional training from me because they've had so many exemplars. It's not clear, but you're gonna want to like switch things up as quickly as you are able to, but just be prepared to go back and reprompt as you need to. You may find that you need to slow down your prompts with the new schedule or as the schedule gets longer. They sort of give some ideas for adding schedules around routines once they master just a lot of the sort of play-based schedules. And I kind of liked, I can't remember if it's this chapter, but I kind of liked the idea of making schedules that the purpose of them is to change up what the activities are to help your child be more able to understand that it's okay when schedules change and it's not the same thing over and over again. That they might have to do a shorter schedule today, even though they're used to these longer chains of events, just because you need them to. But don't wait until you need to be out of the house in 10 minutes to be like, hey, it's the Super Bowl, kid. You better be okay with this giant change. You want to practice ahead of time if you think there's a chance, or you've seen your child get frustrated or upset when their schedule isn't allowed to be completed the way that they're used to.
Yeah, and I think one of the initial vignettes that is in the book for me, like, kind of hit that home, where it was a mom and she had two children, and one of them really wanted to go outside and ride his bicycle. Mm-hmm. And then the other son was having a really hard time with that change in his schedule. Yeah. Right. And so that was set up as like, how can we help this mom help her son be okay with this? Right. And if you have reached this point in your schedule making, right, where you now can be flexible about it and add in other activities, such as let's go outside and watch Johnny ride his bicycle as one of the things that you do in the schedule, that can potentially create a lot more opportunities for flexibility where they weren't present before. Because like you said, you're teaching schedule following behavior as a larger concept rather than these individual activities on their own.
I know this chapter also did get into, as you increase the complexity of the schedules, seeing errors. This is, I think, where there were the most discussion of more sort of punishment-based procedures in terms of if you're seeing lots of errors or if you're seeing an increase in stereotypy as you do your spatial fading, or sorry, not your facial fading, your proximity fading. As the schedules get longer, and more complex, certainly they recommend going back and just reprompting and then sort of maybe fading slower. But then they also, this is where they do mention you may need, if they're making errors consistently with these longer schedules and you've used your other strategies and they haven't been effective, you may want to step in, put everything away and have them start the schedule again, which again could be slightly aversive. This is where they also bring in the idea of they might use response cost for errors. So you take away tokens when the child is not engaging in the schedule, when you're not in the space, and then either return it when they are performing well with the schedule or not return it so that when they're done, they don't get to their terminal reinforcer.
I would just also like to add here that I think everyone should be cautious that we are not holding our learners with disabilities to a higher standard than what the expectation would be for other children of that age, right? You give anybody a 30-minute schedule to do who is, developmentally under, 40 years old, and you're going to see deviations from that schedule. People get off track and they get distracted in what they do, and they might need a few reminders to get back on task. I don't think that is unheard of or unreasonable. And I know the whole idea here is that we are creating, the subtitle, Teaching Independent Behavior. I know and understand that. I just would want to caution us that the expectation is there is zero tolerance for prompts to get back on task, when I think that is very much within the realm of what would be developmentally appropriate for any child.
Well, I was just going to point out, because they also do have a good example, which I wish they called out a little more explicitly, that like when they change the criterion of like what the task is, like this child's father like increases his proximity as the start of a prompting, and that proximity increase alone causes the child to then do all the steps correctly. And even though it's an error because there's a prompt involved, they still reinforce it with a token because it's a harder task. So that idea that like sometimes we should like that reinforcing minimal prompts is useful with people and should be used. We should recognize that like that was harder. So because it just took this minimal prompt, we should reinforce that. So there are reinforcement strategies, luckily, also. It would be nice if they called it out as clearly as they do the punishment procedure.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they just thought they had to add that like as just like a, if emergency break glass kind of like follow-up procedure, because they go into just go back and do the prompts again. Or then later on in like the troubleshooting chapter, they talk about if your child seems like they're constantly coming out to find you, add in some activities in which the activity is coming out to find you and showing what they're doing. Like it may be less about they can't follow the schedule, more they just want you to be a part of some of these activities. And that's great. That's a great goal. It's like you should be excited as a parent. Your child wants to engage you in some of these tasks. So I don't know, but I know we'd mentioned it earlier. So this was the most I think I saw of it in the book as a whole. Since we're getting low on time, and I know we want to get some of the second edition changes, really each chapter after this kind of gets into like, here's one more variation to add. So what about chapter 7's when do activities end? So you can add open-ended tasks. Again, it's really just a matter of teaching the child to use a timer in the context of the schedule by using sort of colored buttons. Or if they can do number ID, especially with like phones nowadays, you just match the number on the the digital timer and press start, putting the pictures in there be a little bit even easier now. You could give them choices about length of time to sort of help them with that as they get older. Time management, in allowing them to choose how long should I play with some of these activities is going to be a very appropriate addition to the schedule. Sometimes you can make things shorter, longer, different variations of the schedule. Chapter 8 gets into increasing choice. So how you can just add in blank pages or pages that have a picture of the schedule that has all the pictures that you could put into a schedule. And that's the cue to have the child go to the book of, here's all the things I could do right now. And I'm going to pick this one and put it in my schedule. I've done those two as variations where every page on the schedule has a front and a back. And the front is sort of where the schedule page is. And then the back of the next page has some options of similar activities. So, for school activity schedules where it's like, well, you have to do an academic task at some point here. Here's the 3 that I think you might like, or more. I've had kids who have like 4 or 5 on a page, and then they take it, they stick it right on the schedule. So they don't have to go between different schedules. But, here they recommend having just something or a board that has all their options of toys or academic activities to choose from, and then just a cue that they can just put on there. You could break it into academic versus leisure binders and have different pictures. You can get as complex as you think your learner will like to use in their schedules. Huge fan
of choice.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say about that.
Yeah, and they do point that out, at least in my edition, as like if there are signs that choice might be necessary if your child is doing this or your child is doing that. I do wish for timers they included using timers to first foreshadow what they want is on the other side of the timer rather than the end of what they're doing, because I think that's a step that's often missed that can be helpful. Because if you only ever use a timer as a signal that what you want to do has an end, it can be a challenge.
Yeah, true. But yeah, like offer choices. That's all I want to say. Okay, what else, Rob?
You can start using words, go from pictures to words. They have a really great example. I think it's still a Mounds candy bar in the second edition of going stimulus fading. So, put the picture of the wrapper. I think it's
Almond Joy.
No, it's totally a Mounds.
Sometimes you feel like a nut. Sometimes you don't.
Sometimes you don't. And they also not only have the Mounds, but they also have the walk icon too. So they show multiple exemplars. In the second edition, they have the Mounds, but then they also have walking on the treadmill. They have a picture of the treadmill with walk on superimposed on it, and then they fade out the treadmill picture and make it smaller. So they have the Mounds, yes, which I love, but they also have the treadmill picture.
Great.
Yeah. And the key thing to remember is don't fade the actual criterion-related stimuli they refer to it as. So the thing that makes the word have meaning, don't fade that. It doesn't have to be fancy Peter Paul Mounds, Comic Sans or whatever it is. But if you change the word to not be Mounds, it no longer means anything. So, don't go overboard with your fading.
Mounds to candy bar is not effective fading.
Yeah. They also, as you get more textual cues, you can do longer schedules. You can do check boxes, so you can make it more like a to-do list than a schedule the way it's been. So you can change the format a little bit as well in this chapter.
The world is really your oyster here.
Oh, yeah.
There are so many ways that you can move it, from like a binder where you flip the pages to, a list that you write in your phone. We all use schedules. We just use them in different contexts, and that is a lifelong skill.
I think this is where I would say this might be a good place to start adding in the electronic management systems. Might be here, especially
your Palm Pilots, your BlackBerry.
This is where you get your Lisa. All these great items. You can get them at a garage sale with the language master.
I should point out for any reader that doesn't know what the Lisa is, that was the failed Apple product that no one knows about except me and Rob. Let's talk about Palm Pilot at the very
It was
least.
a Simpsons joke, Alan. I remember. That's how I learned about it.
Oh my God.
Chapter 10 goes into expanding social interaction skills, which I think we talked about a lot of these already.
We did.
So we're not going to repeat. But again, if you haven't been making more complex social interaction skills, why not? You should. Get the children starting to use longer phrases. You can use stimulus fading with like long phrases, for readers as a textual cue, and then you can start cutting the words out. We did a whole episode, I think, on using textual cues for social interaction.
I did want to say I hadn't thought about one of their recommendations for building peer interaction skills. We're having the peer be the teacher and having both peers having the same material, one being the teacher, one being the student, and then switching places and having the same material to teach the other student to imitate each other and then switching. I just liked that. I think that sounds fun. And using it in the context of the picture schedule, I made a huge, what's it called? Cat ear on my book. Like, wow, I want to do that. It just sounds like, I think it just sounds like a nice, natural way to increase peer interaction without being like, we're going to do peer interaction now. Right. So
yeah,
I just really thought that one was nice. I also might have been late, but I loved it.
Well, and I think that also points out that really you could use any of this with any child. It doesn't magically work because someone happens to be autistic. It's just we have found it helpful for these learners. But if we did have classrooms that that all children learned this way, especially early childhood classrooms, guess what? That's a more inclusive classroom. The universal design of just do this.
Yeah.
All child can learn. Maybe there are children that start to fall through the cracks because these things aren't in place. So
I love a good visual schedule, no matter the context. There's a chapter on troubleshooting, but the second edition before troubleshooting has some additional chapters on more age advanced schedules, I believe. I'm assuming I skimmed your copy real quick, Jackie, one time, but they're not in my version. So are there any big take homes in that section that we haven't sort of covered?
The activity schedules for adults, chapter 11.
Yeah.
Yeah. For the activity schedules for adults, they said that, using the activity schedules at home. So I think they brought in the examples on when you could use them for adults. So they had a really good example about a student, or not a student, but a man who they give 3 examples who used the picture activity schedule to gain independence at their house. So when they got home from their job, it was like, okay, do your laundry. Find out what it says on your meal prep, make dinner, call a friend, right? So they use the activity schedule to basically be like a to-do list, and they made a daily schedule, a weekly schedule, and a monthly schedule and I like that. I need that in my life really well to make sure that they're doing everything. So some examples of the weekly schedules were clean the refrigerator, clean the kitchen, inventory groceries, and then make a shopping list, go shopping. And then they say shop on, and you're supposed to put the date, which I like.
Shop on.
Yeah. They plan an outing, you should go to the movies or see a friend. So they still embed the social interaction piece, even at the adult level. And ride exercise bike. And then they put the little dates that they should do them. And then for monthly at the bottom, they're pay bill, pay rent. Right?
Those are important.
Bill by the 7th.
Good adulting skills.
Right. And then for one of the, I'll let you talk in just a minute, Alan. For one of the examples, Vignette Tony, they had him, as part of his schedule, was invite a friend over to his house and then how to prep a dinner for that friend and what to do and get ready for having like friends over and entertaining. So again, very helpful for me. I was like, oh yeah, that's really helpful. And then the final vignette was for a young woman who needed to email people. And so they used a picture activity schedule or a schedule for using email to talk to her family members and friends. So I just think that was
great.
Updated for the 21st century.
Right.
Go to your AOL homepage
and also included in this chapter, they talk about some different motivational systems, right? They talk about coins. Maybe you don't use it as a token system, but you make it more discreet and put them in their pocket. So when they finish an activity, they move it to the other pocket. They said that it's really important to include choices at work. And this part was interesting for me, was to schedule break times during your work schedule, because that's something that they said that typically adults with autism may not do, is schedule a break and then what to do on that break. So they said if you put that in that work activity schedule, here's what you do on a break, like interact, or you could sit by yourself, but making sure that's in there so that they engage in that response of actually taking a break when you're at work. And they rounded out the chapter with talking about how picture activity schedules can be used to solve problems at work. So in this situation, it seemed like it was it was like multiple schedules. Like you had a main schedule and then you had a sub schedule and then you had another sub schedule of different. So you would move through, I imagine, like little tabs on your PDA or in your binder. But if you come up with a problem at work, then you would go to the sub tab of problem. How do I solve it? And then there's like a whole activity schedule on what to do if you have a problem and who you talk to, and if that person's not available, who you would talk to, and for different sub levels. So they said that for in this case, it helps autistic individuals to keep their jobs, right? Because they can identify a problem and then figure out how to solve it. They said that another time for an individual, when she would get really upset and engage in tantrums, it threatened her employment. And so as part of her activity schedule, if she started to feel overwhelmed and anxious, she had a sub-schedule of her work schedule where she would say, "Excuse me," and go to the bathroom and set a timer until she calmed down before she went back to work. Which, man, I think many people need that, right?
Yeah.
So I did like that, and they said that schedule actually helped her keep her job because she wasn't engaging in tantrum behaviors at her work, and she was very good at her job, and they really liked her there, but they couldn't have her tantruming at work. Yeah.
Alan?
Well, I was just going to build that, like, they point this out in sort of about like task analysis and really being thorough at first, but then fading it. But I think this is often a place where people don't get feedback from the learner, either verbal feedback or even just like, if something's not happening, what's the barrier? Because I was thinking that, especially in like the adult ADHD community, that like just like the idea of like cleaning the living room isn't enough, but then breaking it down into meaningful steps. It doesn't have to look like what it looks like for other people. So it could be something like gather all your trash first, and then gather up all of the dishes, and then gather up the clothes, and then anything else you have left is probably worth keeping and can go to its home. But if you just had like a messy space, it could be very overwhelming to like do all the tasks. And it just made me, especially they have this nice, like for making purchases, it's like a 15 steps. They include get your billfold, look at the wallet to make sure you have money in it. And like that could seem things can seem very overwhelming for certain learners, and maybe don't know how to verbalize. Like I didn't know how to verbalize that. Like I didn't learn how to clean as a child. And it took me into adulthood listening to people be like, oh yeah, just do it this way. It's much easier. It's not how other people do it, I can assure you, because it's just like, why are you doing it that way? It's like, because it works for me. So it's a good place to like find what works for your learner, basically, and listen to their feedback, even if they're not able to like verbalize it.
Yeah. All right.
That's great.
Well, coming in, last chapter, again, I think we've talked about a lot of the problems, but the last chapter in both books is on troubleshooting. But I think a lot of the concepts are the same in terms of if there's problem behavior, ask yourself for these good activities. If you're having trouble fading yourself from the schedule, could you do activities in the same space as the child or have more social activities? Jackie, is there troubleshooting in there?
You actually missed a chapter. In the new edition, there's a chapter 12
what else is there?
called Activity Schedules, a Platform for Progress. And this is
what's that chapter?
So this chapter just highlights that activity schedules aren't used for just one part of a person's life, so that they can occur throughout the span of adulthood, and you can you should be changing them. They should be fluid, and they should grow with the learner. And then they just kind of hit it home again that activity schedules can increase engagement. They can potentially decrease problem behavior because they provide an alternative activities. They say that activity schedules help young people learn to learn. And they give some examples about play skills and social interactions and how you can learn those from doing the activity schedule. They say they can foster independence for all the things that they've talked to. They say that they can promote skill generalization, so that they can generalize across home and school and across the variation of different tasks. They can help young people use the same cues we use. So activity schedules can, again, like we said, I can use my planner and moving that activity schedule toward what other people use, and we shouldn't take it away. So they talk about that a lot in this chapter, is that activity schedules should remain with the student and shouldn't be removed for any reason, because the purpose of them is to provide that support for the learner in those situations. So that is that chapter.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I've seen that brought up sometimes as a negative to using schedules of like, well, what's the point of the schedule? If you can't get rid of it, they don't do anything. And I think that misses the point of the schedule as a supportive guide. That's like the equivalent of being like, yeah, but if I took your phone, how would you do most of us wouldn't be able to do our jobs very well. And we're not like, well, I guess then, we should get rid of phones. Like, well, no, this is a tool that can be used to increase our ability to engage in more complex tasks.
Yeah.
Or even more, it's like a pair of glasses that why should everyone else reads off the board? Why do you need a pair of glasses to do that? It's like, well, if these are assistive technology, they're just no different than a prosthetic device or glasses or any other tool. They're just a tool that help people organize their environment.
Yeah. Not everything has to be faded out fully.
Yeah.
For us to consider it a success.
Yes, because we don't just move through a vacuum where we just get everything done without anything supporting us. That's not how behavior
all the time.
Works.
Yeah.
All right. So
we did it.
That's the book. I mean, we didn't go into every nitty-gritty detail, but I think we would all recommend, if you're interested in doing picture activity schedules or learning about picture activity schedules, I think we'd all recommend this book at the second edition, which is available. I don't know how I got the first one. It was the first one that came up on Amazon for some reason, and I didn't double check if there was a more modern one.
One other thing that I really love about books like this is that they also provide data sheets.
Oh, yeah.
In the appendix, right? So they have a prerequisite data sheet. They also have the picture activity schedule data sheet. And then they have, I'm pretty sure it's probably outdated, but they have the appendix where you can buy
can still get the language master.
Minis. I haven't looked, but they give you, at the time of publications, mini-me's were only $6. And voiceovers
$6?
were $6.50. So in 2010, you could buy the mini-me's for $6.20, but the California card readers were $173, and 100 blank cards were $32.60.
Oh, wow. And how much shipping and handling, right?
Right, I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to look to see if this is still available because they give you...
You can get, I don't know about that deal, but you can get them for like $300 from bigger manufacturers. And you get them on eBay for cheaper.
But no one really needs to do this.
But you don't need to.
Technology.
No, it's outdated
right.
technology.
So you can't. The iTeachWithSound.com, the website they gave you, is no longer available.
Oh, 404 error. Oh, so sad. All right. Any final thoughts? I mean, I think we all recommend the book. If you want to do picture activity schedules, I think this is a great resource to have. A lot of the sections, we talked, I think, about some of the areas where you might want to be, thinking about how your values and your practice has potentially changed, or if you're a newer BCBA, how some of these things might sound a little outdated and you already can think of an alternative for some of the maybe error correction procedures. But the general principles, other than a couple technological updates, I think are still very, very useful and could lead to, quick implementation as a practitioner, and then hopefully quick learning for your student.
I looked up the other one. The audio card reader is also not available on cousinsvideo.com. You can buy that website though if you want to for $400.
That's it?
Yeah.
That's not too bad.
Yeah, not bad.
Cousins Videos is what it's called?
Cousinsvideo.com.
Yeah, I was expecting a different content on that video when you read that URL.
Ew. Gross.
Yeah.
Not one, Not one I want to go to. I do not want to go there.
Don't. After I put it in, I was like, uh-oh, let's see what happens.
Oh, see, I very innocently thought of our children's burgeoning business in which they sell Cousins' Best garlic bread with their cousins.
Well, that's not videos.
No, but that's where my mind went.
Some brand confusion there.
Yeah. Anyway.
Also, Caliphone, the brand in the book, is now an experimental rock band from Chicago. So, boy, like...
That's a good name.
Do you have any other final thoughts that are on top?
Yeah.
I think that... I do too. I'll let Diana go first.
All right. Just going to say, I have, even starting before where they started in this book, I've taught something called a bin-to-bin activity schedule, where you do away with the binder and the pictures entirely, and you just have one bin with maybe like 3 or 4 close-ended activities that the child knows how to complete. They grab one out of the bin in any order that they desire, do the activity, and move it to an empty bin on their right side. And I have taught that as a precursor to the introduction of the binder picture schedule as well. So if anyone is thinking that this is still kind of beyond where their learners are, that is another entry point that was not mentioned in this book.
And I was just going to say, I learned within like a school setting, like functional routines of having the visual be like you take your coat, like when you're at the door, you grab your coat, you put it there, and then where your coat is a picture of the next thing that you're going to do. So it becomes like a very physical exchange.
Mm-hmm.
Like a scavenger hunt.
Yeah. And so, but it starts adding the meaning to those pictures from the get-go by making them part of the physical transition between activities. I think that is often underrated. So
that's very interesting. I had not heard of that.
I'd love to see some what are some guidelines for how to teach those? Because I've seen a lot of those visuals, but they sort of are one of those things of like, look, everyone, a visual. Anywho, if you use it, great. And if you don't, I'll be like, why can't you do your routine? And I'm mad at you. I've certainly seen that happen a lot. So I think there's a level of instruction that needs to go into it, but it's probably not graduated guidance to that extent. It might be for some learners, but I think most, it'd probably just be the modeling and some of the other techniques we talked about possibly using instead. If, for some of the more complex skills, or if the learner had some other prerequisites related to, rule following and multiple, instructional following. Jackie, any other final thoughts?
No.
All right. I'm going to end, as I like to do, by saying, was it a good last sentence? Because every book, I don't care how much of a technical manual it should be, if you don't have a good last sentence, you've done something wrong. And they have a great last paragraph. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's on 106 in the first edition, but it's an anecdote. They end with an anecdote about Ken, who I'll start it and then I'll kind of skim a little and then I'll get to the last line. We've known Ken since he was 3, and autism is only one of his diagnoses. He is severely developmentally disabled, takes seizure control medications that often produce undesirable side effects, and has longstanding health problems. Now 25 years old, he did not learn to follow a photographic activity schedule until he was 16 when this technology became available, but it made an important difference in his life. His schedule, I'll just read it because I'm almost done with it. His schedule cues him to do personal hygiene tasks, to help with household chores, such as setting the table and cleaning his room, and to choose leisure activities. At work, his schedule helps him count and package parts used in the automotive industry, and enables him to select among a variety of options about how to spend break time. Social interactions are included in his schedules, and although his vocabulary is limited, he enthusiastically approaches others for discussion of his plans for days off, for visiting relatives, or going to favorite restaurants. He is pleasant and productive, and we look forward to our conversations with him. Although we can't measure happiness, he appears to us to be happy. I think that's very nice. Although, there are ways they could probably measure happiness. So, but I get the gist of he might not be able to express exactly, his feelings about using the schedules, but in terms of quality of life measures that they're observing or they're directly observing, this schedule had made a huge difference in Ken's ability to be a very independent adult and engage in a lot of behavior that, based on maybe his IQ test or his disability, might have been sort of he's not going to be able to do these. He doesn't know how to do these. He can't do these. He's not going to be able to do all this. And that really allowed him a level of independence. So if you're not using schedules, I would ask, why not? And if you're still not sure if you want to use them, I'd give the book a read and give it a try, maybe with some younger learners or maybe even older learners with some, modified versions of that initial schedule, and see if your client enjoys that extra independence, not having an adult follow them around all day long, constantly giving them instructions. I wouldn't like that. I don't know why we think our clients would like that. And that's our very long titled Activity Schedules for Children with Autism book club. Thank you all very much for listening. Thank you to Jackie and Diana and Alan for being here for our another great book club. Again, thanks to our patrons who are subscribing and getting this when, pretty soon after we make it. And please enjoy the 2 CEs you get for listening. If you're getting this next year in 2025, we hope you enjoyed this as well. And guess what? If you want to subscribe at patreon.com/ABA Inside Track right now, we probably just did another book club a year from now that you can also go listen to and get 2 CEs for free. So it's not too late. It's not too late, folks. It might be too late for the language master, but it's not too late for you.
Good ending. Great ending.
And that's thanks to, we got to do the second code word too. And I want to say also thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit for editing the super long podcast. And for all of you out there who want your second secret code word and said, why won't you just get the second secret code word? I've listened to this whole podcast. It's Mini, 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 like small.
This podcast was not mini.
The opposite of this podcast, mini. This is a maxi podcast, not a mini podcast. That's no, everybody face. That's the opposite, isn't it? Mini. All right, everyone. We'll be back with other episodes, but we'll be back with another book club pretty soon because 2024 is the summer of book clubs. So you'll have another book club real soon in your feed.
Sounds ominous.
It sounds woo. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.